All right, welcome class to our week 6 presentation for Introduction to Literature. We're going to be talking about thesis statements and the art of compare and contrast to get ready for our first essay assignment. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to start talking about thesis statements. In the discussion board this week, I am looking at developing further your ideas for the first essay assignment so you can get some feedback before you actually turn in the final paper. And one of the elements in the discussion board is to make sure that you create a clear thesis statement showing the works that you're going to compare and contrast. So I thought it would be important to go over what a thesis statement is, what it looks like, and then showing some examples later on about compare and contrast thesis statements. So, what is a thesis statement? A thesis statement clearly presents to an audience the point of an essay. So, the purpose, the point, what you're going to talk about. And this is the main idea that the entire essay is going to work to prove. So, it's kind of like the statement that you are going to base everything else off of. And it should also go beyond relating just the topic. So we're not writing book reports, and I think I mentioned that last week. We're not writing book reports here. Book reports, if you recall from elementary school and middle school, is where you share in a piece of writing a summary of a book that you read, right? And that's not what we're doing. We're going beyond book reports for these essays. We're comparing and contrasting, and the purpose or point of your essay should be presented in a thesis statement that goes beyond just telling us the topic. So the thesis statement should not just be this story and this story mean this, or this story and this story say this. So a thesis statement should include the topic. So it does need to have that element, but it needs to go beyond there. So you need to go from the topic to your point of view about the topic and how you plan to prove that point of view. So in terms of your essays coming up, you should include the stories that you read, of course, that you're going to compare, and what's your point of view concerning that, meaning, why would you even compare them in the first place? And then how do you plan on proving it? So that could be the actual similarities and differences that you're going to cover in the body of your paper. So let's look at some examples. So a good thesis statement might say, the authors address similar issues in their books. A better thesis statement would say, Charles Dickens and Charlotte Bronte address several of the same issues in their novels, Hard Times and Jane Eyre. The reason why this is better, obviously, is that we know who the authors are and what works you're comparing. And it shows that they have the same issues. Okay, so we have an element that shows that we're going to compare these two works. So it has somewhat of the purpose of the essay involved in the thesis statement. The best choice of a thesis statement would be Charles Dickens and Charlotte Bronte address several of the same issues in their novels, Hard Times and Jane Eyre. Not only do these two authors confront issues such as divorce and social class structure, but share themes such as biblical and religious references. So the first thesis statement just shares a point of view or a stance. The second is more specific because it does share the author's names and the titles of the books. And it shares somewhat the structure of the paper. And the last thesis statement is much clearer because it shares the topic, the point of view, and the proof. So the topic is these two novels, so Charles Dickens and Charlotte Bronte's Hard Times and Jane Eyre. The point of view is that they have the same issues. And how do they have the same issues? They confront divorce, social class structure, and biblical and religious references. And the cool thing about building a thesis statement, that's one of the reasons why I'm having you do that in the discussion board this week, is that you can take that thesis statement, break it down, and create a clear outline for it. And when you are creating an outline for a compare and contrast essay, you can do that in several different ways. There's a block method and a point-by-point method. So what I have up here is a point-by-point method. But you can see I have the introduction and with the thesis statement, and then the body of the paper is broken up by points: divorce, social class structure, and biblical or religious references. And then you could see in the body of each of those sections have divorce in Dickens' work, divorce in Bronte's work, the similarities and differences between the two. The second, social class structure in Dickens and Bronte's, similarities and differences. So you can see that there's a clear progression of ideas in the compare and contrast with a point by point. You could do the same thing with a block construction. So instead of breaking this down between the three elements that I would cover in the body of my paper, I would break it down by story. So I would have the introduction. The first section would be Dickens' work, and in that I would talk about each of the elements: divorce, social class structure, and theme. And then the second section of the paper would have to do just with Bronte's work, and we talk about divorce, social class structure, and theme. And then, of course, in either instance, we would have a clear concluding paragraph that restates the thesis statement in a new way and relates perhaps it could relate the conclusion to the introduction, bringing everything together. So once you know the topic that you have, what you want to cover in your essay, a thesis statement should be pretty easy to create. So, for instance, if I were writing about the differences between reading a book and watching a movie based on the book, I would want to cover the main ideas in my essay: that the book and the movie should have the same basic plot line, the movie will be over faster, the book will give greater detail and nuance to the overall story, and then I'd create a thesis statement off of that. With the very popular trend of adapting popular literature into film, many will try to determine which method of entertainment is worth their time reading or viewing. Both methods have their own value. A movie allows for instant gratification, while a book will dive deeper into detail and nuance, but the basic story should remain intact between adaptations in order to give the reader or viewer a picture of the author's intention. So we could see that this is 1 to 2 sentences. It clearly shows that I'm comparing the movie to the book. It shows the contrasting elements as well. And so we see a structure coming from this thesis statement. We know what type of paper it's going to be. We have a clear indication of topic, that I'm comparing and contrasting movies and their book counterparts. And then it shows the similarities and differences, the point of view, the stance that I have based on those elements. So when you start to look at putting everything together, some questions you can ask yourself. What is your topic? So that would be basically the stories and their authors that you're going to compare and contrast. What is your point of view? So why would you compare these two? What's the point? What meaning are you bringing together? What arguments or main ideas do you have to support your point of view? So how do they connect? Do you have sections from each of the stories to show the connection? Do you have background information? What are you doing? What kind of things are you going to connect? And once you've answered these questions, you should be able to develop a pretty clear idea for your thesis statement. And like I said, there's a quick tip. Be sure that you include the author's names and the story titles in the works you're comparing. So let's talk about compare and contrast. We know what a clear thesis statement is. Now, for the purpose of this essay, we're going to compare and contrast stories, so it's good to know what that would be. So what's the point? The point of comparing and contrasting is to show that there are similarities and differences between the two, to show that one thing is better than the other, possibly. Perhaps you use a compare and contrast to show that things that seem different are actually very much alike, or things that are very much alike are actually different. So ultimately, with your compare and contrast, what we're looking for is meaning. We're looking for a why. Why would you want to compare and contrast these two works? What's the point? What are they saying? What is the ultimate conclusion that you are coming to? So thinking about that, what is your point? So we know what the reason why we create compare and contrast papers. We know the ins and outs of what they look like. We know how to create a thesis statement for them. We know how to create an outline for them and how they're going to be structured. But what is your point? So think about the two stories that you are comparing and contrasting, or if you're doing more than two. So how are they the same? How are they different? But really the question is, why should we care? When I read your paper, I want to go beyond that book report element, and I want to see something that is showing critical thinking, that you're looking deeply into the stories and you're understanding their connections. So what is the greater impression that you're trying to give to your reader? So I have some examples of thesis statements that I wrote for stories in college, and there are several things that I wanted to point out. So I'm just going to share the examples, and we'll go from there. Keep in mind that I am very wordy. And after finding these thesis statements from my old papers, I'm like, man, I need to slim it down. So I'm a little bit wordy. I do try to keep it to 2 sentences, but they go over a little bit sometimes too. What can you do? Okay, so the first one, it says, with the turning of the 20th century came female political equality and an insurgence of female aesthetic expressed in literature and great gains in the struggle for feminine voice to be heard. Women were allowed to open their mouths, but the rush of modernization also was a breeding ground of isolation and disconnection. Great writers such as Virginia Woolf, Hilda Doolittle, and even Ernest Hemingway were able to address the new roles of women just as a culture of alienation arose around them. This is actually, I thought it was appropriate. Some of the things that I did was I went back and found papers that were written about authors that you guys would be familiar with, and that fit into our time frame that we're looking at as a class. And these writers in particular are modernists, as we have seen many of the writings that we have covered so far were considered modernists, and that's writers that wrote basically between World War I and the end of World War II. So I thought it was interesting to choose this one. You can see that I do share the authors. I mostly focus on what they are similar in, but you can definitely see that there's going to be some comparison going on between these authors, and there is an overall meaning presented. So yes, I can clearly see that my paper is going to be organized around political equality for females, the insurgence of female aesthetic expressed in literature, and the gains in the struggle for feminine voice. Okay, so I'm going to talk about those things. And I'm going to compare them with the idea in mind that there is a great insurgence of new roles for women, but there's also a culture of alienation. So there's going to be that back and forth between the two. So I'm going to relate those things as I compare the works. You can see it there. And the purpose would be to show that feminist writers were coming up in the world during this time period and during the beginning of the 20th century. Okay, so the next one, let's go ahead and take a look. African American dramatists such as Amiri Baraka, Susan Laurie Parks, and August Wilson have attempted to redefine or rewrite the history of their cultural heritage. The art produced not only resists the restraints of European ideology, but also calls upon those of African descent in this nation to take hold of their past and create a future in which African American culture is prominent and thriving. So here we have clear 3 authors that are going to be compared. They're all writers of plays. I did not include the works. But you can see that I'm making a point. What are they all trying to do? What's the culmination? What's the message? And the message is that they're trying to redefine or rewrite the history of African American culture. And how do they do that? They break free from European ideology, and there's also a call to respond. So we can see that in the thesis statement. You could pretty much come up with a pattern of organization for the paper based on these things. And there's a message or a meaning behind the idea of comparing these works. Okay, got a couple more. The next one. When reading about the subjects in Thomas Carlyle's Sartor Resartus, Alfred Lord Tennyson's In Memoriam, and Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure, one may notice each main character coming to a fork in a road, a time of spiritual awakening. However, each author directed the outcome of that awakening in such a way that reflects the religious trend of an entire culture. So what's the point? I'm going to compare and contrast these three works based on the main character's fork in a road, so you can clearly see that's what's going to be compared. And it's going to also show how these forks in a road reflect the religious trend of the time. And then the last one, modernists like James Joyce and his Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, and Virginia Woolf with her Mrs. Dalloway, would lead the way for innovative writing styles and search out personal identity. Through Joyce and Woolf's techniques Joyce and Woolf's techniques may have had similar flow, their definitions of personal identity branched in different directions. So this is a clear compare and contrast between Joyce's work and Woolf's work. We see that the idea, the connection, is that their writing styles similarly portray personal identity, but the way that they do it is very contrasting. So, with that in mind, just some examples. Now, let me go back. I want you to know, I'm not trying to share these examples so you write like me. The point is that we can see in each of these that the authors are presented. Half the time I've included the works and half the time I didn't, but the authors are definitely there. So it's clear there's this distinction of the works that are being presented. And there is also a clarity in terms of what's going to be compared and contrasted in each of the thesis statements. But overall, it's more than just comparing and contrasting. It's also creating a deeper meaning, a purpose. Why would I want to compare and contrast these in the first place? So each of these have those elements. And notice that they're usually 2 sentences long. However, they can be shorter. The first one on this page has 1 sentence. There was a 3-sentence one on the previous slide. So they basically share a similar structure, and they present the topic of the paper, the point that I'm trying to make, and also an element of organization on what things are going to be compared and contrasted. So with that, let's keep in mind that you need to read page 241 to 276 in a literature of an introduction to fiction, poetry, drama, and writing. You can focus on the works that were written within our time frame of 1919 to the 1970s. You can include stories from this section of reading in your essay if you so choose. I do hope that you read quickly and early if you want to do that. Make sure that you respond to the week 6 discussion board questions, and those totally center around developing your essay to help you get ready to turn that in by the end of this week. And of course, watch the week 6 lecture presentation, which you guys are doing right now, so you are accomplishing that element. So if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to contact me. Otherwise, we will take a deeper look at your topics for your essays as we go throughout the week. All right, thank you so much, and have a good week 6. Bye.